Dobre rano. That is all the Czech you will hear me speak this week. I had to practice it. We go from country to country, learning all kinds of new languages and having to say good morning and thank you and hello and I'm so sorry. And then I start speaking Spanish in Germany and Swedish and Prague, and I just get too confused. At least we can use the euro everywhere. Oh wait, no, we can't do that either. I get to the point where I just hold out the money and say, take what you want. I don't know anymore. Anyway, so good morning. Welcome to the very first Update conference. It's so exciting to have your first conference right here in Prague, right, for .NET. It's amazing. I'm so proud of my friend Tomas for initiating this. So, my name is Julie Lerman. I am a .NET developer. Some of you may know me, some of you may not. I come from the US, from a tiny little state in the, well, I guess if you're looking at the map, it would be over here. In the Northeast, it's called Vermont, which is French for green mountain. So we have green mountains. We don't have huge mountains, not like the Alps. They're little mountains, and they have grass on them and trees and things. So they're the green mountains. And I think across Europe, we're most famous for Ben & Jerry's ice cream. You know Ben & Jerry's? It's good stuff. So yeah, we like that. And also, within the last few years, we're also famous for Bernie Sanders. You've heard of Bernie Sanders? Yeah, so he was one of the other candidates. And I'm sorry about the one we have. Sorry, it's not my fault. I did what I could. So what I want to talk about this morning is I wanted to, instead of showing you how to code Entity Framework and DB Context, which I'll be doing tomorrow, I wanted to share some of my many, many years of programming and some of the techniques I've used to continue keeping coding after a lot of years. Now, I used to be very shy about saying how many years I've been coding because then people start doing the math and realizing how old I am. So I just say decades, but I will also say it's been 3 decades. So I started when I was 5. And if you laugh, so you have a choice, right? You can laugh at that joke, which will mean you don't believe that I'm that young, so that's not very nice. But you cannot laugh at my joke, which means you're not laughing at my joke. So, take your pick. Which way do you want to insult me? But it's my joke. So, yes, I've been programming for 30 years, and no, I did not start when I was 5. I started a little later than that. But over those years, oh my gosh, I have had to learn so many different things and change, reinvent myself. I had to learn new languages, new best practices, right? Here's the best practice. Oh, wait, no, here's the best practice. I had to learn new languages. How many people who use Twitter have seen this thread? Some poor guy, I feel so badly for him. He wrote a tweet that said, if you want to be relevant in the next 10 years, you should learn, I can't remember what his list was, but it was learn React and learn, some things that are very, very current. And oh my gosh, everybody's been kind of making fun of him, because, these things change much too quickly to say, just learn this API and you're going to be relevant in the industry over the next 10 years, because it just does not work that way, right? So I have been constantly learning and learning and learning, and I'm still able to, after all these years, I'm still able to learn new things and stay relevant in the industry, and be able to learn enough to share people current technologies. And I'm still having a great time doing it. I'm still really excited. I can't imagine doing anything else for the rest of my life. I hope I am able to continue for, maybe 3 more decades. I might need a little help by then on this stage, or I'll be sitting in a chair on this stage if I'm doing this for 3 more decades. But It is. I mean, is anybody here thinking, oh, this is really nice, but I think, next year I'm going to have another career? Or are you like, no, how could I ever want to do anything else? Even if I wasn't getting paid. It's so much fun. I mean, where do you get to have all these new ideas constantly and the fun and the puzzles of learning all the time? But it also is quite challenging, especially when you have to think about this within the context of your work and your career and being productive, and the temptations of new technology when at work, you have the reality of, no, we can't just keep changing. We have a product, we have to maintain it. We have to have some stability here, some stability for ourselves and stability for our clients. Okay, I'm going to have this problem. I need a stronger battery or something. I actually had this conversation at another, I hope it's not a one-way conversation. We can, but it is a discussion at a conference about a year ago. And at that time, I found this cool graphic with a list of like all these different JavaScript APIs. And I went to use it again to bring to you here. And it was already totally outdated. So I thought, what better than to use a commit strip comic which expresses like, it's too fast, everything's moving too fast. Which JavaScript library are we going to be on this week? And it's not just JavaScript. Who here uses Azure? Right? Like, you can be using 0.1% of Azure, of what's available on Azure, and still say you're using Azure. But Azure is amazing, but a little overwhelming, right? There are so many different services on there and new ones coming online constantly. I mean, it's amazing what Microsoft is doing with their innovation, but it's pretty hard to keep up with. And not only, I mean, you can't learn every single thing in Azure, but even understanding what's there and what you should learn, which things are relevant, which things are important to your work, or things that you're just curious about. So it is constant. It is constant. But, one thing we maybe forget when we look ahead and with maybe a little fear of what's coming down the road and how much we have to learn, we need to look back a little bit, because even if you're not as old as I am, and usually I am the oldest person in the room these days at a software conference, yeah. Even if you haven't been doing it for 30 years, you've probably already done plenty of retooling and relearning and reinventing yourself. Does anybody feel that they've been down that road? Maybe I've, in data access alone, right? Luckily, Entity Framework has stuck and been around for a while, but even Entity Framework has evolved, and now we've got Entity Framework Core. But before that, I was using, ADO.NET, and before that, I was using RDO, and before that, I can't remember, and before that, I was using Access, right? I was using FoxPro back before that. I was using DBase. Has anybody heard of that? Okay, all of you who are over 40 maybe, right? I've constantly been doing that. So, but we've all been doing it, and learning is actually a skill. But what I'm not going to be talking about something, how do you learn new technologies? And people say, well, go read code, read GitHub. I'm talking about a more long-term process of learning over time and this reinventing yourself with new technologies. So we do have this skill. You've got this built-in skill. You need to tap into that and just have an awareness of that, because then you do feel you do have this power, this superpower of being able to learn new technologies. So first I want to share with you kind of my process for learning, and I will not be surprised if many of you recognize this in yourselves. So you hear about a new technology, you think about it. It might sit with you for a while, right? It might take a year before you jump into it. Well, jump into it, like a little tiptoe you probably can't see, just a little dainty toe in the water. It might take a while, you might do it right away, right? But you hear about something and you're like, oh, this is really curious, right? So you start looking at this technology and start maybe Well, some people start by reading. Okay, so I'm curious. When you want to learn something new, do you start by reading? Who starts by reading about the technology or watching a video about how to do a technology? You are very disciplined people. I'm really impressed. So who does like I do? It's just like, I'm just going to go start using it and see how it works, right? Like, I think we should call that IntelliSense-driven learning, right? Right, and if IntelliSense doesn't give it to you, you're like, oh no, okay, then it's Google-driven learning. But God forbid, get a book. I wrote a book. I wrote 2 books that are like 900 pages long. Don't ask me to read a 900-page long book. You can read mine because it's really good, but it's kind of old at this point. So we start learning, and then, of course, immediately it's like, I have no idea what I'm looking at here. I don't understand how it works. And IntelliSense, IntelliSense, I'm not typing the right first letter, not the thing that makes sense to me, it's not even there. And then there's this, right? Right? You go nuts like crazy. It doesn't work. I don't understand it. I'm so stupid. I shouldn't be a programmer. Why did I do this? All of it's, oh my God, it's so stupid. But then we come to this moment of clarity. Like all of a sudden, you see it. You like see the path through and you understand it, right? You recognize that? And then we are full of power. Like all of a sudden it's all back again. Yes, I love programming. This is awesome. I feel good. I feel good about myself. And we know that that's coming, right? Because we've done it so many times. So even when you get to that step 3, the confusion, and that step 4, like, oh my gosh, is so worth it. I mean, we all go through this cycle over and over again. At least I think so. Am I being presumptuous? Does this look familiar to anybody? Right? And so we're willing to go through it over and over again. When we see a new technology, we're like, oh, we're curious about it. Oh, God, I'm probably going to have a hard time. We don't remember that. I don't remember. Like, when I want to learn something new, I don't stop and think, oh, gosh, it might cause me a lot of lost nights of sleep. It might make me doubt my worth as a human being. No, we don't remember that. We just remember, yeah, I learned this other thing, and it was really cool, and I love using it. So that's a nice thing about the human brain. And then for me, and a lot of people I know, when you do learn something new, I love to be able to say, I figured this out. Here's how it works. I want to share it. So that's my learning process. And like I said, I'm pretty sure it resonates with a lot of other people. So this is also sometimes how it feels, a different perspective on the learning process. Now, I got this. I have never been able to find the original source of this, but this is, on the internet. So who has ever used Drupal? Oh, is this accurate? Does it look what it feels like? That felt like you're still alive, so that's something. But it does certainly feel like that a lot. So my theme of my talk is the book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe, right? The Hitchhiker's Guide to Keep Growing Your Tech Skills. So I've got a whole bunch of hitchhiker tips. How do I deal with this? And maybe these are ways you're already dealing with this, but perhaps something I share with you will kind of help you feel a little more powerful and empowered as you go forward. So really, really important piece of learning for me, learning new technologies for me, and you'll see this is almost a theme throughout my whole talk this morning, is that you don't have to learn or be an expert in a topic from end to end in order to be able to leverage it and to benefit. I mean, just think about Azure, right? Like, I use Azure. No, I do not know all 786 services. I'm not an expert in them. I'm not very good at managing the cost management on Azure, right? I don't know all those things, but there are things I use in Azure that I use really well. So, I'm really benefiting from them, right? It doesn't need to be Azure, of course, because that is kind of like a piecemeal thing. But there's a lot of new technologies that come out that you think, oh, well, I don't understand all of it, so I really shouldn't be even trying to use any of it at all. So it doesn't really need to be that way. I have a couple of examples, technical examples from my own past. One is testing, automated testing. So, programming for 30 years, we didn't really have a concept of automated testing back in 1927 when I started learning to program. I don't know why I like to make fun of my age, but being 36 is really hard sometimes. Here's how I tested. First of all, it wasn't automated, it was just testing. So you write some code, the logic you think you want, right? And then you write yourself a little console, right? It has nothing to do with the user interface of the application that you have to write, the front end, but you write it some kind of a user interface just so that you can test the logic. It maybe has some buttons to run this, run that, right? That was at least better than, writing your application and the testing process was putting it out in production and letting the users get back to you on it, right? So I didn't really understand the concept of testing. And then all of a sudden there was, automated testing, TDD, Agile, all this stuff. And I started hearing people talking about test-driven development, and it still makes me so angry to think about all the times I heard, not just to me, but to other developers, you don't do TDD, how can you call yourself a developer? Right? It's just like, what are you talking about? I've got 20 years of experience coding. I've done lots of systems. I'm a developer, right? So I didn't really understand TDD. So I didn't know testing. But I didn't start with test-driven development. What I did was I kind of replaced my process of, and test-driven development, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is writing the tests first that have what it is you're trying to achieve, and then writing your business logic to make the tests pass. And so you start with the tests because those describe what you want to happen. So it was really hard for me to wrap my head around that process. So what I started doing was I learned how to write tests, but I wrote tests to prove out the logic that I had already written. That made sense to me. So I was replacing those extra user interfaces that I was writing to test with tests, with automated tests. And doing that for just a little while, and I got some guidance for, doing it in a streamlined way, some good practices for really benefiting from that. So even though I wasn't doing TDD and I didn't understand all of testing from end to end, I was using the concept of tests, of unit tests, integration tests also, and it was hugely benefiting me. Right? So I'm already benefiting without being an expert. But as I learned more and more and used the test more and more, then the concept of TDD started making more sense to me. Right? So I had some kind of a basis to begin with. And then I started experimenting with test-driven development. And it also started making sense to me. Right? But I started with just a little piece and then was able to grow not expertise, but grow my skills in that area. But even before I had grown my skills beyond just using the tests kind of the backwards way, the wrong way, they weren't the wrong way. I was still really getting a lot of benefit out of them. And I was showing people how to do that too. People who, like me, were a little daunted by the idea of TDD. They'd never done testing before, but they wanted to still see what that benefit was, right? As a matter of fact, I did a course on Pluralsight called Automated Testing for Fraidy Cats Like Me, because I felt that's exactly, here I was with 20 years of programming experience, and I was still like a little fraidy cat about it. Another good example for me was Docker. I am not an IT, I don't do deployments. I don't know about CI/CD. I do not do DevOps, right? So that I could not wrap my head around the concept of containers. But then SQL Server for Linux came out. And SQL Server for Linux was available in Docker, as a Docker image. So that was my path in. I was like, oh, data, database. I do that stuff. So I installed Docker on my MacBook, right? Because I had SQL Server all on my Windows. I didn't need it there. I installed Docker on my MacBook. I learned how to use the image and create containers and interact with it. It took me a little while. But then I had a really good understanding. Like, I finally went, now I understand containers. Like, it was really hard to go from thinking of them being like virtual machines, which they're not, to the self-contained thing. So it's a really, really hard concept to wrap your head around. So I did this small thing, right, of just using it kind of in a developer environment. I still don't do the DevOps stuff. That's, there are people who are expert at that. But I'm hugely benefiting from this small piece, this slice of leveraging Docker. So, and one thing I have to be careful of is when I share those experiences, I want to make sure people understand I am not a Docker expert. I'm just somebody using this, right? And it's okay. So I'm not trying to trick anybody into thinking that I'm some kind of expert in this. So another one of my tips is, and this is a hard one, to not be afraid of new topics. Now, luckily, we do try to erase from our memory that whole period, that learning process, the part of the learning process where you're just totally overwhelmed, right? We just, remember we learned about something new and now we know how to use it. We forget what happened in between. But this is a hard thing, right? Like, because it's, when you have something that you're good at, you're confident in, people know, they respect you, they're like, that person's really good at, this and this and that. It's really hard to put yourself in a position where you might fail, right? Whether it's because you personally can't handle it, or you're afraid of other people seeing you not be great at something. So it's really hard for a lot of people to push themselves into learning a new thing. I actually talked to a man a few years ago he owned a software company, and he had a number of developers. Some were newly out of college, and some had been around, more experienced. And he created the environment where one day a week they were allowed to just go and play with new things, whatever was interesting to them. And this totally surprised me when he told me that it was the young developers, the junior developers, who were really pushing back on doing that. They did not want to do it. And I couldn't understand. You'd think they'd be like, I want to learn everything there is. But he said they were so timid about their experience, and they wanted to stay where they were comfortable and where they were successful, and they were afraid to start doing new things where they might fail, even because they're not seeing, failure is part of learning. As a matter of fact, I saw a talk just yesterday when I was at a conference in Stockholm, and the speaker had a slide that said FAIL. F-A-I-L stands for failure. Oh gosh, it was like, well, he had it so it was the letters that, F-A-I-L, but it was basically that failure is the beginning of your learning process, right? You can't learn unless you have to go through that a few times. Anyway, so it's hard to, push yourself sometimes into new topics. It's helpful when it's something you're really, really curious about. It's a little harder when it's, work, right? At work, and you have to learn something new in order to be able to produce something at work. So this is me. I am always like this with something new. Like, I do not want to learn it. Like a bunch of years ago, I had been curious about doing something with NodeJS. Now, I don't do JavaScript programming. So I did manage to push myself through that. But then it came to the part where I had to do some debugging. And I was having a hard time in Visual Studio because back then it was like this huge extension or whatever. And everybody said, oh, you should try Visual Studio Code. And I had just been through the process of so many learning curves. I was like, no more. I can't handle another new thing this week. I've already learned all these other things, and it's been killing my head. And, so I dude, I was like, no, 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 no. And then I was like, all right, okay, fine. And then I downloaded Visual Studio Code, and within 5 minutes, I was debugging the node, right? I was like, oh, this is so awesome, right? But it is really hard. So I know that feeling. I am like, I am a no, 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 okay kind of person. So a lot of that time, it's the fear, right? So do you like how I updated this for local? Has anybody ever been here? There are some really cool gyms I looked at. No, I'm not a rock climber, but I looked online at, for pictures of rock climbing gyms in Prague, and they are really, really cool. Anyway, so years ago, I thought I wanted to learn to climb. I lived in an area where there was a lot of rock climbing, and there's a few problems with that. One is I'm afraid of heights, and the other is I have vertigo. And when you have vertigo, you think you're falling when you're not. And if you react to the fact that your brain says you're falling, then you could really hurt yourself, right? You're not falling, and you're like, I'm falling, so I better let go. Oh no, I really did fall. So so that's a little hard for wanting to do rock climbing. So what I did was I went to a rock climbing gym, and their wall was like this, right? Like I'm never getting up there. What I did was, the first day I went there, I just went up a little ways. Maybe I was like 5 meters off the ground, who knows? But, I went up a little ways, and I was like, wow, look how far I got. This is awesome. That's enough. And I went back down, right? The next time I went, I was like, all right, I know I can get up to 5 meters, right? Get up to 5 meters, and then I had to challenge myself to go a little further, right? So I did this continuously over time, and finally it couldn't have been that tall. There's no way. But finally, I was able to get up to the top and feel good about it and have fun and be able to going down. But I didn't do it all at once, right? Instead of pushing myself to try, have this goal, I'm going to succeed, I'm going to get up to that top, and then feeling like a dork because, like a total failure, I just went, incrementally, and each one was this huge success. So I feel like I do that in my life and, in technology also with learning. BB, you want to see this. So, this also, was this experience with Node.js, but I'm calling BB out because when we were in Sweden, earlier this week, they had an experience for the speakers where we went to a sauna and then we jumped into the Baltic Sea, which was a little cold. The air was cold. And we were like, we'll never do it. There's no way. We'll go in the sauna, we'll hang out. We're never going in. And it wasn't quite like this. Also, we didn't have to jump. There were stairs, so that made a big difference. But believe it or not, we both did go in. Part of that was because you get so hot in the sauna. You're like, okay, I really need to go in there. But I didn't get in till I went in the sauna, I went out, I went up to here, right? I went into the sauna, I get really, really hot again. I was like, oh, I got to cool off. I went out, I got up to here, right? Third time up to here, fourth time up to here, and they actually put my face in, which was a mistake because it was so salty and disgusting tasting. Anyway, so it's just like this constant back and forth, back and forth. So even though I'm talking about just learning a little bit of something at a time, it's also important to remember you need to know what you're in for, right? It's still important to understand, like, even though I was only using Docker, a little bit of Docker, right? Even though I was only using a little bit of automated testing, I still tried to make sure I had a basic understanding of what the big topic was and where, like the bit of testing I was using, where that fit in to the big picture. And I think that's a really important thing to understand and to practice. So not just, because I think if you just do the small thing without understanding where it fits into the big picture, then you might have a really misunderstanding of what it is that you're doing, right? And also, just like with the rock climbing, and just like, incrementally getting in further and further, I knew I started getting an idea of what I was in for with that cold water. That it just gives you a much better picture of what it is you're doing, and you can start adding to that and learning that. You have an idea of where you're going to. So as I was learning testing, right, I was doing just this one kind of testing, but I understood what the other types of testing were, so that it gave me something to reach for and strive for, and what it was that I wanted to learn next, or what I could benefit from next. That's actually a better way to express that, right? Now there's more there. Which one do I want to learn? Well, which one is going to help me, right? So you just use the one that's going to help you. So just another, and going back and forth from how I do this in technology, but it's just funny to me because the more I thought about it as I was putting this talk together for the first time, I realized it's just how I am in my life also. So the idea of that big picture, even though you're only doing a little bit, learning and understanding the big picture. This is, I don't know if you are familiar with reading topographical maps. I figure you are, but I don't want to be presumptuous. This is a topographical map of a road that goes up through a mountain right near my house. It's just a few miles away from my home. And it's a road that a lot of people they ride their bikes up. And these are usually, it's like bike racers and like really strong people. They have races up and over. We have some neighbors. We call them the Energizer Bunnies, our neighbors. Is that, yeah, you know that advertising here. They're amazing athletes, and they will come home. So this is, to get to the beginning of that, we have to ride up that Gore Road there. Oh, I have it. I've never used it before. Where is it? Is that it? Oh, look at that. So my house is like there, right? So we have to ride this road. This is still already a hill, but the climb starts here. So you're already a little tired by the time you get here, but that doesn't count, getting to that spot. So riding up this road, pardon my back, by the way, but I don't think it will work if I try to do it this way. Actually, I saw somebody once. You can't see that, right? I've seen somebody do that before. It does work. That is so cool. Okay, watch out. My hand is sometimes shaky. I don't want to blind anybody if I suddenly go like that. So go like this. So this is so cool. I can't believe I can do this. I'm learning a new technology right here in front of you. It's so embarrassing. So you can see this is the really steep part, right? And I know this road, kind of. But what I did was, the first time I went to ride up it, I didn't say, I'm going to go right up that road, because there was no freaking way I was going to be able to get up there. I didn't know what it was going to be like. So I just said, I'm curious how far I can get up that road, right? So it's like with the wall climbing. No matter how far I get, it's going to be a success, because the challenge wasn't getting to the top of the road. Will I get to the top of the hill? Yes or no. It was, how far will I get? So there's no yes or no there. There's no success or failure. How far will I get? So the first time I went up and up, and this is okay here. You can see down here, how the grade increases. Believe me, it's pretty tough. So it is relentless. There's really no break, and it starts getting steeper and steeper. Then when you get in here, it's like this the whole way, with not even a moment of any kind of a break. And what happened was, the first time I did it, I got to here. You can still see the dot, right? My little green dot? Okay. So I got to here. I was astonished that I got that far. I could not believe it. Here, this right there. I could not believe that I got there. Wait, maybe I could do it no, I'll just stick with this. I'll be here all morning trying to figure out how to use this. But, I got to there, and like I said, I was completely astonished that I got that far, instead of going, oh, I'm such a loser because I didn't get, to there. So I went back home, and I was like, oh my God. I rode almost halfway up the app gap. That's what we call it. So like a week later, I was like, I'm going to try again, right? So I did, and guess what? I got there, and I was like, I can't go any further. I am going to literally fall over. The law of physics was against me at that point. My bike was moving so slow. So I was like, okay, well, I got there again. That was cool. I was trying not to go, I didn't get further. But it was raining too, so, there's that. So I went home. So then after that, we had to go to a town that was over, over there. We did it in our car. So while we were driving up, I was kind of studying the road, and what I realized was this, okay, so it's steep there. It's even steeper here, but then it flattens out just a little bit here. Just enough. It's not flat, but instead of being like this, it's like that. And I'm like, there's a little relief there. So what I learned was if I could just get past that, I'd have a chance to refresh myself a little bit. Now, what I also knew was this part here, it's a wall. It's 20% grade. 20%. So the next time I went on my bike, because I knew this, I somehow just managed to push through this, and I got here, almost. I was about 100 meters short of the top. And I was just like, if I didn't unclip, I was just going to kill myself and get run over by a car. But I was, again, oh my God, I couldn't believe I had gotten that far. And then, I turned around and went down. Actually, the funny thing is, some people, they go down, they let their brakes go. They're like, I'm like I think I'm going slower down the hill than I'm up the hill. Anyway, but I had that knowledge. Now I could get that far. And then the next time I just, that last 100 meters. But I knew I was learning the route. I was learning the big picture. Right? And learning the big picture was giving me what I lacked in strength, physical strength, I was able to make up for in the mental strength of having the knowledge of what that whole thing was going to be. So if anybody comes and visits me, now, Bibi, you visited me. We haven't, it was winter when you were at my house, so we went snowshoeing. Yeah, we didn't go bike riding, but don't worry, we don't have to do that. So that was, again, in my life, but also in technology. Is anybody here familiar with domain-driven design? This is a really wonderful set of practices for software design. It's not like syntax coding. It's not a JavaScript library or anything like that. And domain-driven design, actually the first book, the book, domain-driven design, came out. That's where it is. I keep saying there's some presentation where I have a typo in the date. It was 2003. This has been out for 15 years now. I came into learning about DDD about 8 years ago. DDD is a huge topic, very, very big topic. But one of the most important things in DDD is called the bounded context. And the bounded context, first of all, I went, ooh, context, is that like a DB context, an entity framework? It's not. But it does have some, no, it's not. However, I did learn, I just learned about this a little bit and realized that this gives you some ideas about creating boundaries around something you're working with, right? Like a problem set, right? So a domain, a subdomain. But it's all about boundaries. I didn't really understand bounded context very deeply, but I got enough information about it that I was able to use it to help me when I was doing entity framework and when I was designing data models and DB context. It gave me a huge amount of power, I'll say, to help me figure better ways out to create smaller models. Because if you've used Entity Framework, if you used it back in the early days, people were pointing to their 700 table databases and saying, create one big model for me, right? So this was giving me some ideas about being able to break those models up and look at the software problems I was solving and create smarter, smaller models that were easier to work with instead of having everything all in one place. So that's only one of the many, many, many ideas. It's one of the most important ideas in domain-driven design, but one of the many ideas in DDD. I didn't understand it very well, but it was still able to leverage it to help me a lot, and I was sharing those ideas. As long as it was, I was clear that, I'm just borrowing ideas from here. This is not the domain-driven design bounded context, right? So it was amazing to be able to use that and do that with just that little bit of help. It was like a little hand-holding. But having started that process, then I started learning more and more about bounded contexts and about aggregates. And as a matter of fact, if you were to look at, the overall goal of domain-driven design is to help you stop doing this, right? Help you when you've got these big messy projects, help get them much more organized. So it gives you, these bounded contexts give you the ability to take all of these problems but divide them up into small problems, and you can solve the small problems, and then we have ways to connect those different bounded contexts. There's patterns that are already there, that already exist. Now, I would love to teach you all about DDD because I'm very passionate about it. But my point is that DDD is big. This is only even a part of DDD. But what I did was I started learning the bounded context, and then by learning that, then I was able to finally start learning about aggregates, and then I started learning about value objects, and little by little I grew my expertise and my knowledge in being able to really leverage this and use it properly. But even so, there was still more and more and more of DDD that I wasn't using yet, but I was already really solving problems in a much better way, and I was already benefiting greatly from that. More bounded context. So what I want to do then is just give you just some more ideas about learning fearlessly. Oh, I think maybe I'll change the title of the talk. That would be great, right? Fearless learning. That would have to be a TED Talk, though, I think. So, this other piece of it, I know maybe, most of you have jobs and you don't have a lot of extra time. You have to do your job and your work and then use the technologies in your work. You have families, you want to get home at the end of the day. I totally get that, right? And I'm not, live your life first. I think that's really, really important. But, when we do see new technologies, even if it's something that's, you can't use at work, if you're curious about it, it will be fun to learn it, right? And don't be afraid of exploring that stuff, even if it has absolutely no relevance to what you're doing at work. Because even if you never use it, just the act of learning will keep your learning skills better, and you can benefit from them at work. So I like to take advantage of that, right? Like something's really interesting to me, and I may never use it. And I dabble in it a lot of things. I don't know if you've seen my MSDN magazine column. I use it as an excuse. I use it as an excuse to try new things that I'm curious about. And I may just try them, write the article about them, and then never use them again. Or, maybe someday I might. I can at least share the ideas with other people. But this is my play box for experimenting, which is nice. And obviously, because I'm writing an article and people are reading and they trust me and they're learning, I have to be very careful. I'm not just playing. If I'm going to write an article about something, I'm going to learn it well enough and also get guidance from experts to make sure the way I'm expressing things and understanding things is correct. Sometimes if it's a program manager at Microsoft, they also might want to make sure that I'm using the correct messaging, right? What is it that Microsoft wants us to know about that? So, I try to help them out with that too. But that's been an amazing thing. So, let's see. Okay, there are a couple of entity framework things in here. I mean, I could write every single article about entity framework, but that would be boring for readers, and that would be really boring for me. So, I mean, my editor says as long as it has something to do with data, you can write about it because it's the data points column. So I even wrote a column about Git. Oh, Git, this is actually like really learning Git. Git was another thing that I just could not wrap my head around at all. And I was out with some people, a bunch of nerds, you know, we were out for dinner or something, and we were talking about Git, and I was like, I used to think I was smart, but I look at Git, and I'm like, I'm too stupid to learn Git, I don't understand it. And he looked at me and he said, but it's just data. It's just data, like it's just retaining data. It's like a little mini database, except it's text. I was like, oh, really? So he gave me some ideas about, you know, better ways to dive into it instead of the classical way that people are teaching it. And so I did that, right? I'm like, I'm just going to play with that. And I found my own path for getting my head around it and understanding it. And of course, then, you know, I had to share that for people who were like me going, because we're not too stupid to learn it, right? Unfortunately, I hope I'm the only person in this room who says that to myself. Oh, I'm too stupid to learn it, because we're not, right? I mean, look at what we do for a living. I always have to have an excuse to put that in there, right? This is how I am with the new technologies, right? But it's just my favorite GIF, so we had to have that in there. I saw a photo of this quote that somebody took at another conference from somebody's talk. I have no idea. I couldn't find the tweet again. I have no idea whose talk it was from, so I can't credit them. That's why I put the quotes around it. But I thought it was a really, really good, important piece of advice to add in there, right? Just because you have questions. I am so afraid to ask questions publicly. I waste so much time. I will waste hours, days, trying to figure something out myself before I humiliate myself publicly by asking, right? Like on Twitter or asking on an email. I mean, that's how I feel, right? Like, I'm so humiliated. Because usually it's something that somebody else has already done. They know it right away. And they're like, oh, yeah, no big deal. It's this, right? And you're like, oh my God. I want to make sure I have turned over every single rock and looked at every single possible way of doing it so people know I did my due diligence, right? That I wasn't being lazy. And it's ridiculous. I waste so much time because my ego, I'm so afraid that somebody's going to think I'm stupid, right? Or that I was being lazy, right? That I was being lazy and asking. So keep, you know, don't be lazy. Like, try to figure it out a little bit yourself. Do a little due diligence, but don't be ridiculous and waste hours, waste days. We have such an amazing community, whether it's on Stack Overflow or, you know, people on Twitter. And any problem you've ever had in your life, somebody's, hopefully, you know, usually somebody's had this problem before and solved the problem before, right? And somebody will have a quick answer for you. So don't be like me. Right? I keep trying to tell myself, like, just ask. And, you know, somebody answers it right away and you're like, oh my God, why did I waste 3 hours on that when I could have just asked after the first, you know, 15 minutes of trying to figure it out myself. So I think that's really, really important to keep that in mind. And a quote that I've heard from Scott a number of times, which he uses for all kinds of learning, whether, you know, the first time I think I read him say this or heard him say this was about Twitter. Right? He follows like so many people. I follow a bunch of people, but it's, you know, it's like I can't read everything. But I still take in a lot of information, even though I don't act on it all the time. So there's a lot of stuff sitting back here. And maybe someday, you know, I'll be doing something like, oh yeah, I read something about that somewhere, and then I can just like go Google Bing it and dig further into it. So I like this concept of just letting this information wash over you, not being, you know, just getting kind of a scan of like all this other stuff that's going on. And this also helps with the within the context of saying, you know, I might learn just a little bit of a technology, but I can, you know, let the big picture of that technology kind of wash over me. So I have a basic understanding of what's going on there. And then, of course, the question, what should I learn? People ask me that all the time. Now, if you're, you have a job and there's a particular thing you need to do, obviously you have to learn that. But what about the other, the other stuff, the learning for fun and learning for curiosity? Learn whatever turns you on. Learn, like you hear about a new technology and you're curious about it, right? Then it's fun, right? As opposed to like, oh, everybody's learning React, right? Like, I guess I better learn it so that, I sound like I'm hip, or I know what I'm doing. No, pick the thing that's interesting to you, and that makes it really fun to learn. So I was really happy that Tomas scheduled me to be able to talk about this at the beginning of the conference, because you're at the beginning of 2, or if you're doing workshops, 3 days of having so much amazing information, so many ideas to learn. And don't worry about attending a session and using it to become an expert in something. Just let it wash over you. Just get those ideas and just let them just kind of be somewhere in your head. Believe me, they'll be in there even if you think you forgot it, because you can also always, Google the rest of it, right? So you've got 2 days. I'm sorry that you have 3 rooms to choose from every single day. That's always the hard part. But have a wonderful, wonderful conference, and thank you so much for coming this morning.